Hello, this is Marcos Patchett, the Nocturnal Herbalist, and in today's video, it's the second in my series of 6 videos on social isolation. I'm going to be talking about the psychosocial effects of social isolation according to current research. So, this information is taken from a paper by Cacioppo and colleagues, a 2015 research paper that is linked in the description box below on YouTube, and they found that lonely people experienced several traits which could be described as increased social anxiety collectively. So people who describe themselves as lonely had increased worry about other people's negative evaluation of them. They had an increased perception of threat in social situations. They had increased sensitivity to negative facial expressions, not positive ones, just negative ones. And they also tended to have a greater fixation on negative social cues in general, or social scenes. And they also had worsening sleep, so poor sleep quality. So that's humans. In rat studies, they found that male rats put into social isolation had reduced physical activity and aggression. So that's interesting. The male rats got a bit more docile, they chilled out a bit more, but when they reintroduced the rats into society, into rat society, the rats became more aggressive. So, but that's a rat study, that's not a human study. In humans, they found that social interactions were experienced less positively by humans who felt socially isolated. Now that's really interesting because you'd assume that social isolation, like when you let somebody out, they'd be like, woohoo, I'm free, and you know, but it doesn't work like that. If somebody's been accustomed to being socially isolated, actually it seems to make them more socially anxious. So this was associated with increased threat sensitivity and decreased reward sensitivity I mentioned earlier in this video. There were also signs of increased fear responses. So in the brains of animals which were tested, socially isolated animals, they found that the amygdala, which is a part of the brain which, among other things, controls fear, and this other area of the brain called the bed nucleus of the stria terminalis, which moderates fear responses as well. But the difference between the two is the amygdala is rapid fear responses, like, you know, sudden fear. That was a bad imitation of somebody being afraid, but you know what I mean. And the other one, the bed nucleus of the stria terminalis, which I'm going to call the BNST from now on because it's easier, the BNST, that mediates longer term fear responses. And if the amygdala gets switched on enough, it'll switch on the BNST. I think that's the short Reader's Digest version of it. So there's a potential here for self-reinforcing isolation. In other words, a sort of the formation of a vicious cycle, because if isolation causes animals or humans to become more socially anxious and to get less pleasure from social interactions, or potentially for, you know, any animals with more testosterone, i.e. male animals or possibly male humans, to get more aggressive when reintroduced into society following social isolation, then social isolation may in fact become a preferred state. And this goes back to the paper by Bujdock and Dunbar in 2020, which is called The Neurobiology of Social Distance, where they showed that loneliness produced this skewed perception of negative cues and social threat. So remember, there is a difference, as I talked about in my previous video, there is a difference between loneliness and social isolation. Loneliness is subjective. It's an internal felt emotional state. So people can be lonely with loads of people. Social isolation is the objective, factual state of not having many social connections. But often social isolation does go with loneliness. They are correlated, but they're not the same thing. So anyway, they found that loneliness caused this skewed perception of social threat and an increased expectation of social exclusion, leading to learned social helplessness. And The final thing I want to say in this video is that there's this phenomenon they identified called social contagion, and this is well known. It's been talked about in other contexts. I think it's probably a similar thing to the mirror neurons idea, the idea that when we hang around with other people, we literally make connections in our brains which reflect the connections in the brains of people we communicate with regularly. Social contagion in this context is that people's social groups tend to develop a higher level of homogeneity. In other words, if you know a lot of happy people, you are yourself likely to be happier. If you know a lot of depressed people, you are yourself likely to be more depressed. And this seems to be more than just birds of a feather flock together. It seems to be actually, even if you're not birds of a feather, if you join that flock, you will eventually become one of those birds because the behavior rubs off on you. So they found that people who had an increased number of, both number and proximity were important here. So it's not just the number of friends you have who are happy or depressed, it's how close they are. So if you have a friend living very close to you who's very depressed and one living very far away who's really happy, the one who's depressed is more likely to influence your mood negatively than the one living far away who's happy. I mean, it makes sense, right? But this effect was found even with friends of friends. So it's not just your close friends. It's not just that your best mate is on a downer and is bringing you down, or that your best mate's on a high and they're making you laugh. It's their friends. It has a domino effect. We are more closely interwoven than we realize. We are not, you know, the cliche, no man is an island. Well, it's true. We're not. The island is the bit that sticks up out of the water. Underneath the water, all the bedrock is connected. Anyway, enough of the poetic idioms. I hope this video was interesting. In the next video, I'm going to be talking about some of the mechanisms. I've already talked about in the previous video some of the physical health ramifications of loneliness and social isolation. In this video, I've talked about the psychosocial ramifications of social isolation and loneliness. In the next video, I'm going to be talking about the mechanisms. Why does this happen? Anyway, I hope you found this interesting. If you have, please like the video, please do share it, and please subscribe to the channel, and hopefully I will see you in the next one.